Is installing double slips really that complicated? Let me put your mind at rest. Hi, welcome back to Chadwick Model Railway. I'm Charlie, and today we are looking at Peco Code 75 Electrofrog double slip wiring, the same with Peco's Code 100 insu frogs, and also in general terms standard electrofrog points from Peco. So that's where our main focus is today. The reason I'm doing this is obviously I'm going to fit some of these into the freight yard board, but I get a lot of questions about wiring electrofrog double slips with the frog wiring, how it actually functions. I mean, perhaps the instructions aren't quite straightforward, let's say. Anyway, let's crack straight on with this one. So this is the most confusing one. This is the Peco Code 75 Electrofrog double slip. Right, what's it all about? Right, on the reverse side, clearly this is a used one, so please excuse the sort of bit of damage. Right, so we have two frog wires, all straightforward, and we have two power feed wires, also quite straightforward. So you would normally put your red wire on one, your black on the other, and then connect these two frog wires up to your point motor. Seems straightforward. But the confusion I've got confused on it as well. But what causes the confusion is the fact of wiring these two frogs. So if you change your attitude about double slips and think of them as two standard points, right? So you put one on top of the other and you've kind of got a double slip. So to change this frog name, obviously we change this point. Similarly, you want to change that one, you change this point. It's exactly the same here. So if you want to change that frog, you use the point motor on the other end and vice versa. So if we get a couple of point motors and poke them into place sort of thing. So there's one there and one there. So we need a point motors which must be mounted about there and about there. Quite cozy now, isn't it? Or of course you can mount them here. You just need to route the frog cable separately. So when you mount your point motors, this frog wire goes to this point motor and this one to that one. Straightforward. If we just close in a moment on this particular point motor, and hopefully you can see that there are 9 terminals on here, and the outside two, M1 and M2, power it. But coming down to aux1, which is a switch, and there are 3 cables going into aux1. Now the lower one is the one you would connect to the frog, and the other 2 cables above it, let's say terminals 2 and 3, you connect to track power. So let's say you put the black in the top, in the red, and the red into the one beneath it, which would be terminal 3. Connect it all up, should work fine. If of course it doesn't, and every time your train then comes along and hits the point and you get a short circuit, or coming this way and you get a short circuit, it's because the 2 cables coming in on terminals 2 and 3, the red and black, need to be the other way around. So just reverse the 2 cables and hopefully it should work fine. But obviously you need to reverse the cables for this frog on this point motor, and that's the dilemma that people get into. And I agree, it's not straightforward, it's not obvious. It is what it is, and the instructions they're kind of there, but like most people, why would you read instructions? Now the other thing you must do with this point is obviously fit insulated fish plates on the ends of the frogs, because when you change the polarity of the frogs, you can't change the polarity of the rest of the tracks. So it must be changing that over. So this frog will change its polarity, say from the red feed to the black feed, and that's the way they work. And that's all I can say on these things. And the single slips are exactly the same, no problem whatsoever. They are quite straightforward. If you've got any questions, then please leave them in the comments section down below. Right, changing the subject a minute. If you're finding this video interesting, please hit the subscribe button. And if you're a subscriber, hit it anyway, because a lot of subscribers are having their subscriptions removed for some reason for various channels. It's not just mine by any stretch of the imagination. So just have a click of it and make sure. Right, so that's the code 75 double slip. Right, let's move on to the code 100 insual frog double slip. Now with this point things are much simpler because there are no cables to connect. That has its drawbacks, and you can see the tips of the frog are made of plastic, so the frogs themselves don't reverse their polarity when you change the points. But that's not quite, you know, a gain really, because obviously when your loco runs over this frog you lose power to it, so you're going to rely on the power coming from the other axles, which is a little bit of a problem if you're using 040 shunters and the like. But you don't need any insulated rail joiners because the point is as it is. And with the wiring here underneath, you can see these cables. Well, that's because this rail here is connected to this rail here. Similarly, this one here to this one here. And similarly, this one here is connected to this one here, and so on and so forth. So there is no extra cabling required, perhaps. Right, but what you do need to do is get power to it, and I think rather than relying on power coming in from other rails, you need to put a pair of droppers on it at the very minimum. Now let's talk about a standard point a moment. Now this is a code 100 electro frog medium radius point. All straightforward really. There's a frog cable. There's the terminals located here for snipping through should you wish to put a link across here to give you better running characteristics, because then these rails here maintain the same polarity as these ones here rather than when they're switched across. It's a better way of doing business. But I had a visit from a friend of mine the other day by the name of Brian. Now, Brian came over with one of these and he'd been in there with a soldering iron. And hopefully you can see from this image here, there are these two black wires. Well, what Brian has done is he's actually connected underneath. He's connected these two rails together and these two rails together. Well, why would he do that? Well, in this position, power from this track is touching this switch rail, and it goes along here, and obviously power also comes in the other way into this switch rail. But in the fullness of time, when things get crabby and dirty, you can actually lose a bit of power on this track, and similarly on the one on the other side. So what Brian has done is he's put these two, put a black cable across these two and across these two to bond them together so that in the fullness of time it makes the point more reliable. That's of course if you're any good at soldering. Now I'm going to go back to our code 100 insual frog point now, because I recall down at McKinley Railway, who I go down there with David and do some of his filming occasionally, they have done exactly the same with one of their points. Well, not one of their points, all of their points, I should say. So what they've done is they've actually bonded together this rail to that rail, this rail to that rail, that one to there and that one to there, and of course all on the other side. So before I think about doing that, what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to copy what Brian has done with his point to see if it is, to see how difficult it is to get in there with a soldering iron and wire it up. Now I'm going to use 702, and I believe Brian actually used 1602 looking at the thickness of that cable. So 702 will give me the flexibility as the point opens and closes. But I will need to drill a couple of holes in the board to allow the loop of wire to drop down. But it's an interesting thought process, so we shall have a little look at that. But the first things first, let's stick on a couple of droppers onto our Code 100 insu frog double slip. Now it's worth doing a quick continuity check with my little tester to show you which ones are connected to what. So this is the outside rail, which you'd expect to be connected to the outside rail of the same track here and here, but not here and not here. Similarly, then this switch rail here, nope, throw that point. So this switch rail here, this switch rail here, but not here. Nope, hang on a minute. Yes, this one here, but not this one here. Beautiful. So we can generally see how it goes, and that all the rails are connected. Let's talk in red and black, so all of this is connected and it should work perfectly well. So it doesn't actually matter where I put the droppers on. So I think just turning it over, and for just sort of ease really, I'll probably just cut into the webbing here. Yeah, just cut into the webbing here and here, and then put the two droppers in and bring them back. So quite straightforward. Let's do that. And using my nice new knife, the blade probably isn't quite so new now. I'll just remove those bits of plastic. Then of course, bearing in mind where the point motor is going to go, my cables will drop down without getting in the way of the point motor. Should I put it that way around rather than that way around? Okay, so we're all good to go. Next I need to do is roughen this up. And this is just to roughen the surface for the solder to bond to. And now with our soldering iron at 400 degrees, so if I can do that the other way around so you can see better. Going left-handed is a bit of a challenge, I'm afraid. And there we are. And tin the ends of the wire. So the black will be on the outside here. Give them a good sharp tug. Lovely. And then hopefully you can see that they're quite sort of discreet really when they disappear down into the board just through the one hole. So I need to cut those to length. Right, on to Brian's proposal then. So here we are. Code 100 Electro Frog medium radius point. Now, one thing I do want to point out to you is that as this thing moves, you can get some slack where these rails join. And if I pull down on this a little bit, you can see that the rails do actually come apart. Okay, so that's part of the reason for Brian's train of thought, I imagine. Now, underneath here, I've already cut away a piece of webbing from here and here to expose the rail. So now I'm going to scratch up a little bit of the surface to give me some bonding for the solder. Going carefully on the back of the switch rails. Okay, right, here we go, in for a penny, in for a pound. So I'm trying to put a little blob of solder now onto each of those, and this is a small flat bladed soldering iron tip. And then the switch rails. And the other rail. Nope, I've stuck them together. Don't know if you've seen one of these. This is a solder sucker. It's a plunger. You melt the solder, place this over the tip of it and press the button and it sucks up solder. So hopefully you might be able to see this. And the solder's away. Lovely. Right, now, so if I use this small piece of orange 702, and see how we get on. Now I think that's just a little bit long there, so we'll come back on those. Don't really need them that long. And then I'm trying to solder them into position like that. Actually, I think it's still a bit long, aren't they? Well, let's just solder one in position and see how we get on. That's the first one on, and then I'll adjust the height of this one now, I think, so it doesn't need to be that long. And then obviously we're going to drill a hole in the board now for that wire to go down. So let's snip a bit more of this off. Yes, I don't think that's too bad. I'm not sure if you can see that very well. But as you can see, the blades change. There's a minor amount of movement, but the rails are bonded together. Just give them a yank. Yeah, They're okay, that works. Let's have another go at the other one. There's Brian's method. And they are thoroughly bonded together. There's not too much damage, I don't think. Nope. How hard? I don't want to pull them too hard because I could bend the switch rails. Brian, I thoroughly approve. I don't know whether it become a standard fit for me, I must confess, but it's certainly erring on the side of caution. I do like that. Right. But would I do that on the Code 100? Would I try to emulate the McKinley method? I might sleep on this. Well, it's now the following morning and I think you're going to be disappointed to realise that I am not going to do it. This is only about sort of 18 inches in from the edge of the board, these two double slips. So they are easy to maintain, and the risk and my soldering skills are such that I'm not going to contemplate doing this. I'll have next time I'm down at McKinley, I'll get one of the gentlemen down there to show me how they do it and perhaps pass that information on to you, or perhaps get them to do a video on it. Safer way of doing it. At the end of the day, these are 40 odd quid a go, and even though I might make an adequate job of it, I think we'll leave it for now. But what I would like to do is just to come back to the ordinary Peco electro frog points, because there's an issue that I have found, and that's with the frog wire breaking away. Because what I normally do is I just get a bit of green cable and I solder it. I snip this cable a little shorter and then I solder my green cable on. But you're always left with this vulnerable area here where it is possible for the frog wire to break away. So what I thought I would do, also something else, this is what also I realised that Brian had proposed, was to cut away a little bit of plastic here, cut off this wire completely, and then bond in aggressively and solder in the cable in there to make a sort of a more secure job of it. Okay, so in for a penny, in for a pound. Let's firstly remove their frog wire. Looks like we're committed already now. And with a sharp blade in my my sexy new knife, I'm just going to cut a little more access for my soldering iron to get in. So hopefully you can see now that the area is cleaned out. So now perhaps I can get in there and tin it properly. Okay, now my green wire. Okay, now hopefully that should be a lot firmer and they're the normal frog wire. Now, just to make sure that we haven't made a silly mistake here, because we need to do a quick con check on the frog wire to the frog to make sure that it is actually connected up. So the end of my wire, and so it will connect to here. Okay, right, so there we go. A sort of satisfactory modification, and you know, I'm not suggesting you do this to all your points, but in the past I certainly have pulled away the frog wire when I've removed a point or whatever, and you know, how do you get back in there? Well, hack away the plastic. A lot of it had to be removed. It was melting, and obviously you got to get in there to get a decent contact, but we're good to go. All I need to do now is just the normal modifications here, which are the cutting of these two shorting links, and then pop a set of cables on there, and then this one is ready to fit. And to remove those two links, it's just a case of getting a pair of snips in there and snipping them out. And then, of course, to put the cables across here. Now, what I use, or what I've changed to using of late, is I put two cables across each one. One cable is to supply track power, naturally. That's 1602, but this is actually a bit of 2402. And then a piece of 702, which goes to the point motor to supply the power to the frog, rather than running two separate cables all the way up from your sort of terminal blocks. So I need to whap in with a little bit of solder on these 4 tabs here. Which I have sort of scratched up, if you know what I mean. So that's those there, nicely tinned. And then my thought process, that must be there, so this must be red. So all I do then is think about this. If I thread those through first, no, don't be threading through, you dipstick. No, they just need putting on. Right, so going for the outside one first. And then once it's gone on, leave it on there to bond before you give it a tug. Lovely. And then we can come in onto the second one. And again a tug, and then simply repeat it on the other side with the black. And there we have it. So we have our cables that go into our point motor to switch the frog, and the power's coming in to give the whole thing track power. And then obviously there's the frog wire. Lovely. And then when you fit this, the only thing you've got to remember, of course, is to fit 2 insulated rail joiners on the end of this frog. And there we are. Right, let's get the board down now and see about fitting that double slip, and then we'll be done. Now here we are with the board back onto the bench top, as it were. And as you can see, I've just quickly overlaid the initial plan. The initial plan was changed. This point here was swapped out for a double slip. And if I show you what was underneath and how we progress now, this is where we are. So this is the double slip that I've been working on this video, and that's the next one to go in. Now if I just remove these other pieces of paper, hopefully it will make sense now that using the 6-foot way gauges, I've got to make sure that these tracks remain parallel. So that is where these tracks must be. So these 3 tracks here, 1, 2 and 3, will remain parallel going off onto the next board. So this is today's board, today's point, and the rest of it now can move away. We don't need those. Back onto this 3-way point here, and as you can see, we've got insulated rail joiners on both of the frogs. Obviously this one here doesn't need any insulated rail joiners, and there's a steel one going across there. So now we need to do is mark out where to drill the holes for our point motors, which are going to be underneath. Oh, sorry, I have mentioned there's the cables coming down for track power for this particular point. The other point that we spoke about earlier goes around about here, the other point that we modified, but that'll be done at a later date once this double slip is in and progress has been made. Right, Scenic 3D. If you remember, I'd used their Jigs before. Well, Scenic 3D are back on the scene again, and these double slips have 2 holes on each switch bar for 2 different locations for the point motor, and these are the holes that coincide. So now what we must do is fit the jig over the top and make sure that we get alignment and it settles into place, and you can see that that's how it is. Then I need to decide where my point motors are going to go, bearing in mind there are also 2 point motors to go under the board on this point here, and access is from this side. So what am I going to do? Well, this point motor can go here, which will give me access, though it will be harder to get to because there'll be a point motor on that one, and this one could go here, and it all seems good to go. I could put it here, but I don't think there's any real difference really. So all I need to do now is to drill the holes that correspond. So there are the 4 cutaways, and here are the 4 holes that will give me that alignment, and similarly the 4 holes on here. Remembering that that is the side of the board where the operator works and I have access should I need to disconnect these point motors. I think it's worth saying at this stage that the whole of this board will be removable. There's only one piece of track that connects it to the main layout, so after undoing a few screws and the odd terminal block, I will be able to pick it up should we have a serious malfunction, say a point motor change required or whatever under this board. It might well be a day's work, but it's not a case of taking a saw to the thing to get in there. It should be reasonably accessible, perhaps a day to turn around and fix it, get it all back together. But that's my thought process. There's no way in the world you can get underneath here, hence they're using these MP10s rather than tortoises. Right, so all I need to do is drill these holes, whap the point motors on, and I'll be done. Okay, let's talk about drills. There's a 2mm drill that I use to drill the holes down through the jig, and then to mark out where the armature wire is going to come up, I use a 1.3mm drill in here. I also use this to drill the holes in the sleepers to put the screws in. And then obviously for the armature wire itself, I use a 10mm drill. Right, so you've decided where they're going to go, and they're going to go there and there, so I just need to drill those 8 holes. Now I've just discovered that actually I cannot drill all the holes. I can only drill the outside 2. I can't drill these 2 because otherwise I'm going to start drilling straight through the point, because the point is clearly in the way. I'll just check on that. Actually, it looks like it isn't. Let me just mark those out first. Well, that one isn't in the way, that's for sure. So the last thing you want to do is obviously drill straight through your point. And now, having flipped the board over, you can see 2 holes missing. We've got those 4, but only those 2. So it's simply a case of aligning those ones there and then marking out where they go. And then, of course, now a case of just fitting up the points where they need to be. And the proof of the pudding, of course, is always in the eating. Just the job. Well, that's our double slip installed now and working. Here's the next one that I've got to put in, and obviously I'm not going to go through that because it's just an identical process really, but you can see that it's starting to shape up. And then over here in this area is an industry, and the electrofrog point that we wired up will run into that area into 2 sidings. A quick recap on this series for this this branch line station, as this freight yard. 216 was the number of the intro video, and then 218 was all about the installation of the 3-way point plus the MP10 point motors, and then 219, the last video, where we looked into the difference with frogs, whether it be unifrog, electrofrog or insu frog. And then obviously we've got today, and next one is 221, which will be about the wiring. Now I'm not going to go into the intricacies of the wiring and let you watch me put wires into terminal blocks and all that sort of blah. I'm sure you'd rather fake your own death. But instead, I'll have done the wiring hopefully, and then just show you how and why I've done it and the process of how it works and that sort of thing. And hopefully we'll manage to get something running down the tracks. No, fingers crossed. In the fullness of time, hopefully by the end of April, this board and the board that butts onto it will be finished. I think there's 8 point motors on this board and 4 on the next one, so I've still got a bit of work to do, but that'll be off camera. So there we go, that's kind of how it's all shaping up. Now, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. It appeals to the algorithm apparently. Anyway, in the meantime, there's the old button if you'd like to become a patron. Patrons make it all possible. There's the old subscribe button. Remember, subscribing is free. In the meantime, there's a video here and here, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks, take care. Bye-bye.